Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Give it another minute or two to see if other folks are going to join us, and then I will pray and we will start.
Yeah. You see that big one flyers on there? Yeah. I think he's the only one in there.
I'm really happy for uh, those of you who are able to join tonight, and I hope that you find some new learnings. Tonight, the topic was Justice Ministry, so what I will be doing is just giving you maybe a little larger snapshot of the ministry that I was engaged in my previous call in terms of our outreach ministry that we did with folks who were connected to the criminal justice system. There's no way in a short period of time to delve into all the issues that are um, enmeshed with folks who are connected to the criminal justice system, either by way of conviction and or arrest, but I just hope to kind of scratch the surface this evening so I can leave time for us to have some conversation later, and maybe even, you know, help you think about some of the things that you may have already thought that you knew or that you did know. Maybe the information that I offered tonight isn't going to be new to you at all, but it's just a snapshot of the ministry that I led for a number of years, and another way for us to think about how we might be able to be more connected to our community. And this is in no way saying that this is what the expectation is for Good Shepherd. It's just a way of broadening our perspective. So I'm going to pray and then we will start. The Lord be with you. Oh, gracious and loving God, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this gathering, God. We thank you for all who are under the sound of my voice, and we also thank you for those who would want to be joining us, but for some reason cannot. God, we ask that you would let this time that we are together be a time of learning, a time of also connecting our learning with our faith, and then questioning, God, what does all these things that we know connected with our faith, how is that pulling on us and calling us to serve our neighbor? So we lift these things to you in the precious name of Jesus, knowing that you hear us and that you will answer. Amen. So I decided that instead of trying to come up with something new today, because I've been super busy trying to see if we can get some of the small business loan money for the church to kind of keep us going. And so I'm going to use a variation of a presentation that I normally would use when churches or some of the organizations within the ELCA would ask me to come and speak to them about this work that we were engaged in with folks who were connected to the criminal justice system. So just doing a variation of that tonight, a much shorter version than what I would usually do, just to kind of familiarize you with some things, and then we can discuss for a while afterwards. So I'm going to start the presentation now. So incarceration is a thing that's been with us for probably most of humankind. I mean, it's been around for forever, and in the United States, um, it began here as this country began. And while the history of incarceration is long, the intention of what that system was supposed to do well, the intention of the original founding fathers of especially here in the United States, of our criminal justice system, I think that what it has evolved into today is quite different from what they had intended. So this next video, I'm going to show several short video clips through this. So this next video kind of talks about the evolution of the criminal justice system in the United States.
The United States is exceptional, at least when it comes to being the world's biggest jailer. 2.2 million people are imprisoned in the US, more than in any country in the world. More than even China, who dwarfs us population-wise. When you count the people who aren't just incarcerated but on probation or parole, the number skyrockets to 6.9 million. That's 1 in 35 American adults caught up in the prison system. And for people of color, it's even worse. 1 out of every 3 African American men born today will go to jail or prison at some point in their lives. But why? How did the so-called land of the free put so many of its own citizens behind bars? If you think it was always like this, it wasn't. Back in the 1960s, our incarceration rates were the same as Europe's. And if you think there's just more crime here, that's not true either. Our crime rates are pretty much on par with the rest of the Western world. I asked Alicia Santo, a staff writer at the Marshall Project, for some insight.
The reason that America has the highest incarceration rate, to put it simply, is tough on crime policies. Over the past few decades, a number of very harsh policies have been enacted in state and federal legislatures. A lot of these had to do with longer sentences. Some of these had to do with so-called 3 strikes laws, which basically said that if you got in trouble 3 times, you had to be in prison, regardless often of how petty those crimes were.
To get a sense of how prison-happy Americans are, consider that in Germany, only 6% of people convicted get locked up. Compare that to 70% of people convicted in the US. And Americans wind up behind bars for longer. The average sentence in the US is 3 years. That's 3 times longer than in Germany. Harsh drug laws are also part of the problem. The 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act instituted a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years without parole for possession of 5 grams of crack. Guess how much cocaine you had to possess to trigger the same minimum sentence? 500 grams. Interesting when you look at who consumes each drug more. Even though the law was recently relaxed, we're still dealing with its effects. And overall, black and white people use drugs at the same rate, but black men are almost 12 times more likely than white men to go to prison on drug offenses. Finally, when it comes to our soaring prison population, mental health also plays a role. About half of all incarcerated people suffer mental health problems. For 10 to 25% of all prisoners, that means serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Drug and alcohol dependence is also common, and instead of getting help, many mentally ill people cycle through the system over and over again. But it's not just the mentally ill who struggle to escape the cycle. Being convicted of a felony can follow someone long after their time is served. It can make getting a job, housing, and an education even harder. And it also often means losing the right to vote. In Florida and Virginia, both key swing states in national elections, more than 1 in 5 black people are disenfranchised. But the prison boom hasn't been so bad for everyone. Private prison corporations like Corrections Corporation of America and Geo Group are actually profiting from it. The Corrections Corporation of America made $1.6 billion in revenue in 2014 alone. This is all part of what's called the prison industrial complex. And when 1 in 35 of us is directly caught up in it, you gotta ask, just how free are we?
The words jail and prison are often used interchangeably, but actually describe 2 different kinds of institutions in the US. The main difference between them is
So she asked that question, how free are we? And I think that that's a question worth thinking about, considering that our prisons and our jails are filled pretty much with people who look like we do. And, you know, a piece of that pie really has a lot to do with mandatory minimums, which came into effect as the video said, in the mid 80s. And so a lot of people don't understand what mandatory minimums are, but this next video clip explains a little bit about them. And if you have other questions, of course, we can talk about that at the end.
I think most Americans believe that after you commit a crime and pay your debt to society, the punishment ends. You have the chance to rebuild your life and get a fresh start, but the reality is much harsher. We punish people with criminal records long after they've paid their debt to society, and we all suffer for it. Even simply being accused of a crime is just the beginning of perpetual punishment. A cycle of legalized discrimination, poverty, and reincarceration, a cycle kept in motion by 47,000 laws and regulations nationwide that restrict critical rights and opportunities. After contact with the criminal justice system, millions of Americans are denied employment and housing, denied college educations, excluded from public benefits, separated from their children, deported despite being legal residents, and deprived of the right to vote. These restrictions trap the poor and people of color in invisible cages that extend far beyond prison walls and criminal courts. Cages that lead to a lifetime of obstacles that undermine even the most earnest efforts at rehabilitation and redemption. Cages that send the message, you will never be a part of society again. This is not some isolated problem. 95% of all incarcerated people will return home at some point. Each year, more than 600,000 people are released from jails and prisons. That's roughly the population of Boston or Seattle. Millions more are completing non-jail sentences like probation, community service, or fines. As reentry specialist at Brooklyn Defender Services, a public defense firm representing 45,000 clients per year, I work on the front lines to help people with criminal histories overcome their past and navigate the obstacles of their present so they can build a sustainable future. I try to help folks take responsibility for their own lives, but it's hard to do when the outlook is so bleak. Even for low-level offenses and misdemeanors, the aftermath of one individual's experience with the criminal justice system ripples out to entire families and neighborhoods and gets passed down from generation to generation. The result, more poverty, more crime, more incarceration. I see Javon, an 18-year-old young man who cannot live with or even visit his family and cannot find an affordable apartment because he was convicted of gun possession and banned from all public housing. I see the dangerous shelters and street corners where he'll sleep. I worry about what he's going to have to do to survive, how long it'll be before he's back behind bars. I see how society loses when Judy, a 58-year-old grandmother charged with a misdemeanor, is fired after her arrest and barred from her lifelong profession as a home health aide. Unable to work, she's faced with eviction and can't support her family. When Malik, a 26-year-old father, is denied the opportunity to further his education because of the mistakes of his past, I think about how he and so many others are set up to fail. How a conviction on a rap sheet is only a snapshot of a moment in time, when all of us are dynamic, changing over time. The criminal justice system disenfranchises these men and women, preventing them from growing, from truly being free. I am among the very few fortunate enough to be living a second chance. 3 decades ago, I was involved in a crime that took the life of another human being. I spent over 24 years in prison for my role in that reprehensible crime. While incarcerated, I had the chance to participate in a pilot program offered to only 15 inmates that allowed me to pursue a formal education. Upon release, I found an employer willing to look beyond my criminal record, one that saw the hard lessons I learned in prison as an asset, not a liability. Affording people a real opportunity to re-enter society isn't just good for individuals and families, it's good for all of us. Meaningful re-entry increases productivity, reduces poverty, and saves money. Most importantly, it makes us safer by eliminating the circumstances that perpetuate cycles of crime and punishment. People already get punished harshly by the system, but they shouldn't receive a second sentence that makes discriminating against them legal for the rest of their lives. By restoring full rights of citizenship to people after they've been through the system, we can start to end this cycle of perpetual punishment. We can start to abolish the justice trap.
So in addition to the things that you've already witnessed in those couple of video clips, there are certainly many, many other challenges that folks are faced with if they have an arrest, and especially if they have a criminal conviction in their past. One of the things I think that have been most destructive to um, Black communities across the country is the destruction of family units. This chart shows the increase in the number of women who have been incarcerated over the years. So you can see that the rates were really pretty low leading up to the late 70s, but in the late 70s, early 80s, it starts to rise, and it continues to be on the rise today. And what happens in that case is that that increases the number of children that enter our foster care system, because a lot of these women who end up incarcerated for whatever the reason is, they are the heads of their households. So when they become incarcerated, then their children become connected to the foster care system. And then the likelihood that that family will ever be unified is slim to none. Most women who lose their children to the system due to incarceration never regain custody after they are released. And it's also documented that lots of kids who enter the system because of a parent going into incarceration, that those children end up being connected to the criminal justice system eventually themselves. And finally, this statistic, you know, we exercise our civil and political voices through our democratic process. And for many folks who have a conviction in their past, they are denied the right to vote. So this this map shows you, I'm not sure how well you can see it on your screens, but anyway, it shows you the states and how they line up with how folks lose and or regain their right to vote in various states. So those states that are red, for the most part, people lose their right to vote permanently if they are convicted of any of a crime, especially if it's a felony. If it's a felony, they're going to lose their right to vote. If it's a misdemeanor, it's iffy whether they ever regain their right to vote. The dark blue states usually restore the folks their right to vote once they have completed their incarceration, their parole, and their probation. That's 19 states. Then you have the gray states, and those states restore the individual's right to vote once they have completed incarceration and parole. The light blue states restore the right to vote once you are not incarcerated any longer. And the green states, you never lose your right to vote. And it just always strikes me when I look at this map that the green states are the states where there probably are the fewest number of people of color in those states, Vermont and Maine. And I recall, like, my youngest son lived in Vermont for a number of years. And he used to say that when he left the state, that there was no diversity there. So anyway, that's information that lots of people don't know and don't think about. The fact that folks they lose their right to vote, and many permanently. So because of these things that have been said, I mean, there are lots of collateral consequences that are often never spoken of. And these are the things that the gentleman from the Brooklyn Defense thing. He spoke of some of them, but the challenges that I've seen people face over the years is that, you know, if you're incarcerated for more than 2 or 3 years, when you return to your community, you are you're faced with an unfamiliar landscape. You know, for those of us who are out and about every day, we see the changes that happen, the buildings that go up, the buildings that come down, the stores that open and close. We see that, but when someone has been away from the community, like when they go into incarceration, they have a snapshot of the world as it was, as they left it. And when they come back, that landscape is totally different. And that in itself is very disconcerting. Even folks who enter incarceration with good skills or even great skills may return home with a lack of skills or an atrophy of skills. For the most part, there are very few training programs in our correctional institutions today, certainly very few, and even fewer learning programs. So even if they had a good skill set, that tends to not be the same way when they return, because use it or lose it is a real thing. And so that puts them at a disadvantage as well in the employment arena. Changes in family, new family members, because, you know, births have taken place or family members have died. And so now even, you know, this person is now entering into a family that they may no longer be familiar with. Challenge. Of course, employment is a challenge for a number of reasons. The biggest one being that in so many places, people hold your criminal record against you, and so that bars you from certain types of employment. Not to mention the collateral consequences of there being so many laws that actually prevent you from being able to hold certain jobs if you have a conviction in your past. Housing, as we heard in the video, is also a challenge. If you have a drug conviction, you can never live in subsidized housing. And if you don't have a job, you probably don't have enough money to be able to afford housing on the, you know, regular economy. Community resources, of course, are not ample for folks who are trying to deal with the effects of reentry from being incarcerated, or those who have an arrest in their past trying to clean their records up or whatever so that they can be gainfully employed. Parole is also another barrier, because lots of folks, especially folks who are incarcerated at the state and federal, well, not the federal level, there's no more parole there, but at the state level, most folks who return to community come home with parole. And so if they just step one iota across the line while they're on parole, it doesn't mean that they commit a new crime. But if they're late for an appointment with their parole officer, if they don't hold a job, if they move without saying that they've moved and where they've moved to, all those are violations of parole. And so even without committing another crime, they go back to prison. Probation, same type of deal as parole. Maybe the consequences aren't quite as stiff. And the collateral consequences that I've spoken about, you know, they really are quite mysterious. You know, because like I said, you may know about, you know, folks losing their right to vote, but there are, I forget, my last research, somewhere in the neighborhood of 45,000, 46,000 laws across the country that restrict opportunities for folks based on their criminal history. And although these consequences can have a real profound impact on the lives of those who have been convicted, judges and prosecutors really very seldom discuss or consider what the collateral consequences are for folks when they give them certain sentences. So, you know, there are lots of collateral consequences that are triggered by different types of crimes that are committed, but lots of times they're not even applicable to this particular individual or whatever crime they may have committed. So it's really kind of an insidious type of thing that, again, and that's a thing that makes it difficult on the community resource side, because unless you have folks who are familiar with, at least in your own community setting, what types of collateral consequences may apply to individuals who you may be serving, it's really hard to probably help them get the help that they need, or help to move them in the right direction. So, you know, this is one thing that for me was always, the collateral consequences was always a really strong point for me in encouraging people to never plead guilty to something that they didn't do. Because once you plead guilty, you're guilty whether you actually did it or not, and then you face all the consequences that come with being guilty of that particular crime. So then that leads to the question, how can we help? You know, folks, when I would give these presentations, lots of folks would ask me to come out and talk to them because they wanted to engage in this type of ministry or something similar to it in their community. So what does that help look like, and how can we help? And I always tell people the first thing to helping is not to think that you know what someone needs. You need to ask them what their needs are, and then figure out how you can position yourself to best support them and accompany them. So in the ministry that I led, help looked like, you know, we had a mentoring program. We had a computer lab on our site and that it was open to the community 6 days a week, for folks to come in and work on resumes, cover letters, apply for jobs, because, you know, at most libraries, your time on a computer is limited. And so I thought that it was important for us to have a computer lab. And I think at our largest capacity, we probably had a lab that contained about 15 laptops. So a good number of people could come and work and do the things that they needed to do. Conducting employment search workshops, and that was basically just, you know, helping people gain the soft skills that they would need, how to look for a job. You know, someone had been incarcerated for 20 years, looking for a job in the 21st century looked a lot different than looking for a job in the 80s. So just helping them to understand what that looked like, and you know, sharpening up their interview skills and that type of thing. Truly very important life skills workshops. Just, you know, how do you navigate life? Again, using a scenario of someone who might have been incarcerated for a really long time, when they went to prison, not being familiar with cell phones, computers, so forth and so on. And now they come out and everything, our world is driven by technology. So, you know, something as simple as how to use a bank card. I never forget, I don't know, this was, you know, mid 2000s, someone entered a workshop of mine, nice young man, and he sat in my office and he said, well, I have all these cards and I don't know what to do with them. Like, I got home and my family gives me all these cards. What am I supposed to do with them? He said, what I asked them for was money and they gave me these cards. So he didn't know how to use bank cards. They didn't exist when he had when he had gone to prison. And so it's just, simple things about, just teaching people how to shop, how to use technology, and just how to navigate life. Support groups. We had several support groups that we ran. Groups for those who were returning from incarceration, groups for the families of folks who were returning from incarceration, and we partnered with several schools that were near the church and offered after-school support groups for kids who had family members who were incarcerated. A resource clearinghouse. And so kind of what that was is that we regularly went into all of the prisons that were in the Philadelphia area, state, county, and federal. And in the federal facilities, we would often meet folks who were not going to be returning to Philadelphia, but because of them being incarcerated, they had no way to find out what resources were available to them to the places that they would be returning to. So we often would do some research for people to help them find re-entry programs or churches that were willing to welcome them in the areas that they were returning to. Expungement assistance was super important because lots of folks would have arrests on their records that never ended in a conviction. And those things are automatically supposed to go away, but they hardly ever do. And it used to be thought that only expungements could only be written by attorneys. But we uncovered that that was not true. And I went and got trained by the public defender's office on how to write an expungement. And that became one of the biggest things that we were doing in the community, which was writing expungements for people who had arrests on their records, but those arrests did not result in conviction. Because when HR department runs a background check on someone and all these arrests show up, they don't know the difference between whether they're looking at an arrest or a conviction. And so that person may be turned down for a job that they really qualify for and shouldn't be eliminated from being interviewed for. But the fact that all those arrests show up could be a problem. Support for families in a number of ways, accompanying families to court for legal proceedings, as well as the support groups. And then again, like I said, the families of anyone who was incarcerated or arrested, they were also able to use any of the other things that we offered at our center. Support for the incarcerated, we corresponded with folks, wrote letters to folks, visited people in that way. Support for children, I already talked about that a little bit. And I don't know if anything like this exists here in New York, but in Pennsylvania, they have this wide network that's called Benefit Bank. And we were a benefit bank site. And basically what that meant is that folks could apply for their government benefits directly at our site. Instead of having to go to the county, whatever, for lack of a better term, the county welfare office or whatever, where lots of times people don't feel that they're treated with any dignity or respect. We were able to do that on our site by getting training from the benefit bank. And participatory defense, and that's really exactly what it says. We would help people to be participants in their own defense. And that basically means making a case for yourself so that when you go before the judge can view you as a whole individual, not just an offense that's on a piece of paper. And so that meant, accompanying folks to court, trying to make sure that there was as much community support in the courtroom as possible every time someone had a hearing or a trial, and helping them um, to write what's called a social biography, and that's their bio that would give a picture to the judge of of the whole of who they are, not just that criminal act that they were accused of. So does this model work? And I think I said first I'd like to say in these videos, there are 2 videos that were made about the ministry that I led, and you'll hear people talk about me. I always have to say that I never engaged in this work alone. I had a wonderful team of folks, all volunteer, who worked with me every step of the way, all of the years that I did this ministry, because it would have been impossible for me to do it alone. But this model was always evolving because, again, I said the most important thing to me is to find out what people need. So we were always evaluating what we heard from our participants and fine-tuning what we did to make sure that we were meeting the needs of the people who came through our doors.
Freshly out of prison, you're kind of lost because no one wants to give you a chance. Everybody's looking down on you.
And one of the great things about Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod is we look to serve those who are marginalized, those who are poor, living in poverty, and where can we show up and be who God created us to be, and that is the church. So we were fortunate to find Linda Manson, who had a passion for people returning to society, and partner with her for Living Gospel Ministries.
Well, this ministry is necessary because each year over 35,000 return to the Philadelphia area out of incarceration, as well as triple that amount who are convicted of crimes, and then they face the same social sanctions. So they need assistance with finding employment, housing, and in general just knowing that they are loved and cared for.
Pastor Linda, instilled a lot of stuff in me, about we are worth something, and we don't let that beat us down and all that stuff, and just keep pushing, and it helps.
At Living Gospel, we have what we call our life ministry, and in the life ministry, we offer employment search workshops. That's to help people improve their skills or gain a set of skills, if you will. We also have self-esteem workshops. We offer support for families who have incarcerated loved ones. We have a computer lab where folks can come and just use the computers to do online job searches. I like to call us a wraparound for folks who have a criminal conviction in their past.
And Pastor Linda's program is relevant and is now. Everything's up to date. You know what you need to do, period.
I hear from prison chaplains that they have no lack of folks who want to come into the prisons to offer Bible studies and worship services. However, when folks are released, they really don't want you to come to their church and sit next to them in the pew. We need in our lives, at least I know I do, I need to know that I am loved, because there are so many times that I feel unlovable. And for people who are connected to the criminal justice system, that is probably much deeper and much wider than it is for you and I.
Not only do we need a Linda Manson and a Living Gospel, we need a Linda Manson and a Living Gospel with satellite sites all over Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod to meet the sheer volume of men and women who are coming looking for a welcome place. We are the ones who lift up continuously God's work, our hands. And so here we have an opportunity for everyone to participate in one form or another. You can show up and you can be a mentor, you can write a check, or you can pass the offering plate to help us start these new ministries. I'm inviting you to go and see what God is doing in our midst.
For me, it's really important that the people who come to be in ministry with us feel that they are loved and cared for.
I was in a 24-hour survival mode, and I stayed in that mode even when I came home. So for me to trust her and for her to be able to penetrate the wall that I had built up, it was only by the mercy of God, because it wasn't me.
Not finding jobs and stuff, and she just made me realize that it's somebody doing worse than me. Somebody can't see, somebody in the hospital, somebody dying, and she just made me look like you free, you home, you got a second chance to be on the streets, and she always pounded that in my head.
So I think it's really important that they know that they are loved and cared for, and I believe from the response that I get from the folks who show up, that that's how they feel when they're here. They feel like they're valued and that they're worthy.
First thing I noticed is she's very approachable. You can see it, like she's real passionate about helping every individual out. So that allowed me to be able to be open with her and share her, you know, what I wouldn't share with anybody else.
For the journey that we go through, you know, the people that's struggling, the people that's coming home or have convictions, can't get jobs, can't get support and things like this, there are people out here like this that helps you and has an open hand to assist you, and I thank God for that.
And from September of last year, I haven't had a bad day, and that's because of her.
It make me feel like there's somebody watching over me, because she just called me in to see how I'm doing and what I'm doing. And, you know, because sometimes you be on the street, you can get caught up. And she just make me, she like a mom, like a grandmom, like, what are you doing? Like,
so I really feel like, you know, that she's that helping hand that I needed.
Unfortunately, as a society, we do very poorly at really being the second chance people that we say we are. And for me, that's what makes it even more important for the church to be here with open arms saying, here's your second chance. We're here.
And I told the pastor, like I just said, as long as I'm healthy and I'm out here, get myself established, I'll be here to support it and try to stay connected with it, because they helped me get back in society on the foundation. And I thank God every day for that. I really do. So I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful.
So that's a lot in a really short period of time, but we have about 15 minutes. If we go a little longer, that's fine, for your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and you can put your questions, comments, concerns in the chat, and we will chat.
Well, Pastor Linda, this is Chatina.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can.
I'm very glad to be here this evening, and thank you for sharing with us the well-rounded work that you did in Philadelphia. And I'm hoping that, you know, maybe we can find the same outlet here in Nassau County, even Suffolk County, because obviously we do have a very large criminal base of Nassau County, and, you know, residents and people who are incarcerated that could use someone like you, you know? So.
Can't do it alone.
You have a good voice. No, we can't do it alone. So thank you for bringing it to us so we can see what we can do.
Amen.
Right. Yes. Okay.
I love it too, Pastor. I really, really like the presentation. This is Keon. How are you guys?
Okay.
Hi, Keon.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I really love it. Just thinking of, you know, recidivism. I think that something like this would really help to, you know, the majority of us are pretty much what's there. So as much support as we can offer us as a whole to help us get forward, I welcome it.
Yes.
Okay, for some reason, I am not seeing the chat. Okay. So Tom asked, is the ministry completely dead? And it is not completely dead. No, I am thankful for that. Um, the team that I left there in Philly, they still actively visit all the prisons. They still the participatory defense part of the ministry is still going strong, where they support folks as they navigate the court system. However, all of the activities that took place in the building uh, have ceased, and that's a real loss for that community. It's a real loss.
Wow. So have you reached out to the our prison system, Nassau County, to the children's system, to see how we can get involved?
To be perfectly honest, I have not. I have had people reach out to me since I have been here because I knew some folks in this area who were actively involved in participatory defense and so forth. But at this point, I have not had the time that I feel is needed to dedicate to trying to get something like that off the ground in the right way. I think, to rush and do something and not do it well is not a model that I want to follow.
And imagine if you had started it and now we'd have to stop right now because of this coronavirus. So that would have been like, God, jeez.
Yeah, so so I feel that, and these things that we're talking about over these weeks, I'm not saying that Good Shepherd has to be married to any of them. I'm just throwing out, initially these first few weeks, like I had said in the beginning, I'm going to tell you more about what I did before I got here, so you can get a broader perspective of me and my history in ministry, but also to just probably pique some interest in trying to figure out some ways that we as a faith community might be able to be more closely connected to the community that surrounds our building.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Someone is not muted. Any other questions? I don't see anything coming up in chat. Comments, concerns?
Pastor, I was typing it out, but I figured let me just go ahead and unmute and talk.
That's fine.
I was wondering if, so criminal justice may or may not be the ministry for Good Shepherd and for the area that we're in. It may be homelessness and hunger. It may be any number of things. And I was just wondering if there's any thought to how we might set up a way of deciding what that is, of figuring that out.
Well, actually, I mean, these are things that I will, pose to the congregation as we are able to get back to quote unquote normal, whatever that is. But one of the things that I did, the folks who we distributed Thanksgiving baskets to last year, I had everyone fill out a form, and I have called those folks periodically just to ask what their needs are. Like if Good Shepherd could help them, what would they want us to help them with? And so I've been keeping that. I have those notes and those records, and so I feel like that would be a good starting point for us whenever we start to come out of this and try to figure out how we can be more closely connected to the community. Those would be the first things that I would want us to think about.
Sounds like a great idea. And, our need to build our congregation, perhaps we can kill two birds with one stone and find a way that we can help that also builds our congregation. I'm thinking like something that is outreach to young people so that we can get more young people into the church. And maybe a lot of the things that you did for the reentry community could also be adjusted just for young people who are entering adult life. and, you know, what are
Oh,
their needs?
absolutely. I mean, a lot of that stuff that I did came from, you know, because, well, you know, because you were on council, but uh, the the rest of the church probably doesn't know. I mean, I served as a youth minister in my home congregation for almost 20 years. So I really do have a soft spot for young people, and I love being in ministry with young people. It's just I realized um, after my last national youth gathering that as much as I love it, my body can't stand couldn't stand it because after a week and a half with young people, chaperoning them. And when I got home, I had to take another week off work just to get myself together. I realized a younger body was needed to keep up with those kids. So I really do love youth ministry, and I've done a lot of work with young people over the years. And so lots of ideas about how to make that happen. But a lot of, especially the life skill stuff, a lot of that was shaped from what I used to do with our young people.
Thank you. This is all great stuff.
So somebody says, oh, thank you. You're welcome, June. And Faith, love the braids. Yeah, Faith, I wore locks for a very long time. And then at the end of 2017, I decided it was for time for a change. So I just got up one morning and cut them all off.
Can you hear me?
Noraya, yes, I hear you.
You're hearing me, okay. You seem to have a lot of great tools for that ministry. Now, do you think something like that could work at the Shepherd, location-wise, size-wise?
I mean, first of all, I don't know that first of all, I don't know that we have the space
Right.
to do something. But my take on any kind of ministry is not that, like, what I did with Living Gospel in the Life Ministry doesn't have to, you don't have to try to replicate it someplace else.
Uh-huh.
I always say, like, nobody has to do everything, but everybody can do something.
Uh-huh.
So maybe there's a piece of that we could do. But I'm not, again, you know, being new here, I've tried my best to really get acclimated to the community by showing up at as many community meetings as I can. But I'm still not clear on what the needs of this community are.
Yeah.
And so that's where I really have to rely on you all and the community that we're not connected to tell us. And then I think then we decide, well, what is it that we have the tools and the gifts for that will really serve the folks who are around our building? Anyone else? I don't see anything else coming up in the chat.
Were you attached to a prison system, a specific prison? Were you, in order to get the clientele?
No, like I said, we were connected to, we visited on a regular basis all of the prisons that were in the Philadelphia area. So inside Philadelphia itself, there were five county jails. There was one federal facility in Philadelphia, two large state prisons right outside Philadelphia, and then one large federal facility. Actually, the federal facility was 5 prisons on one piece of land right across the bridge in Jersey at Fort Dix. So we would visit all of those prisons on a regular basis. Basically, we were trying to connect with people who were going to be released within, who were like less than a year away from release, and we would try to establish a relationship with them then, and start working with them to help them transition out. Like the one gentleman on the second video who said that, since he had been released, he had never had a bad day. Well, we had worked with him for a year prior to his release. We went in and we met him at one of our workshops, or maybe it was a community fair or something, but we met him and he said he was going to be returning to Philly. So we, through correspondence and our regular visits there, we worked with him to try to prepare him for when he came out. And then he ended up being a part of our community for about the first 6 years that he was out. Yeah. Because and he was incarcerated for 37 years.
Oh Lord.
So he needed a lot of help. and adjustment was not, he had a great personality and had wonderful job skills. So he was able to get a job right away, but adjusting was hard because life was nowhere near like life was when he had gone to prison. So yeah, over the 12 years that we existed, we had well over 1,500 participants. And those are people I call a participant the folks who actually took our workshops, came to support groups, and that kind of thing. And overall, on any given month, we would field maybe 500 phone calls just from people in the community calling and asking, they just wanted, maybe somebody had a son or a daughter who was going to court and they were really scared and they didn't know what to do, just a chance to talk to somebody and get some advice. So there was a lot of good ministry that happened from that building.
Okay, thank you very much.
Pastor, would you be open to working or partnering or collaborating with someone, with another agency that currently addresses this kind of?
Absolutely. As I said in the video, you listen to those folks and they make it sound like it was just me. It was never just me. I may have had the idea and gathered some folks around and said, look, this is something that our community really needs. And I had the expertise because for 12, 13 years before I left the Prison Society, I was the program director for the reentry program at the Pennsylvania Prison Society. But when I decided to go to seminary, I knew that I could no longer do that job because I was in and out of prison every day. It really required a lot of me that I knew I would not be able to do seminary studies and perform that job adequately. So I left my position at the Prison Society when I started seminary. But I did not ever stop doing the work. I continued to volunteer at the Prison Society until I started Life Ministry.
I put a contact in the private chat, and so maybe we can talk about that later.
I see that, yeah. And I'm always happy to make contact with somebody and then say, whenever things change, we can try to talk about, or we can start having conversation and see what the needs are. But yeah, thanks, Faith. What was the rate of participants that did not return to prison? Actually, our rate was phenomenal. Thanks for asking that question. We had a 95% success rate. It's proven that when people are given a chance, and the thing that was most important to me was that people felt that they were worth something. You would hear over and over again, or maybe when we would meet people while they were incarcerated, they wouldn't even look you in the eye because that's something that they couldn't do in prison. Like, you don't look directly at a guard or even, so just to help build their self-esteem and help them understand that they do have value and worth. Um, and then being connected to a faith community. Those things are in it, people who, because then they have accountability. They feel like, if that they're going to be letting you down if they go on the wrong track. Like the one guy um, said, like I would just call him just to see what he was doing. I call him to see how he was doing and what he was doing, because he would go off the rails sometime. And so I'd have to call him and say, what are you doing? You haven't been showing up. I know you lost your job. Come on, do you want to stay on the street or not? So just just to help them have some accountability, but then also know, like, I'm not saying this to you because I think you're horrible. I'm saying this to you because I care about you and I care about your success. You're welcome, Annette. Well, I thank you all for being here and listening to my history and my past. And next week, I'm not sure where we're going to go. I still have one big part of my ministry experience that I haven't talked to you about, and that's my the ministry that I was involved in with people experiencing homelessness. So maybe we'll venture there next week. I mean, for actually up until the time that I came here, actually they still say that I'm a part of their team. I was a volunteer clergy person for a church called the Welcome Church. It's a church in Philadelphia that's a church without walls. And that means, we go out on the street and minister to people on the street, and we have worship on the street. So that was a big part of the work that I did there too. And actually, my former pastor, she founded that ministry and pulled me in because she found that once she was doing ministry on the street, that a lot of the people that she ran into were people who were connected to the criminal justice system, and she didn't have that area of expertise. So she approached me and asked me if I would volunteer to be on her team to fill in those gaps that no one else on her team had. So yeah, maybe next week we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'd like to hear more from you guys about what you're thinking and what your ideas are. So I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate your attention. Please stay safe, take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you all on Sunday. Have a great night.
You too, Pastor.
You too, Pastor. Good night.
Good
night, everyone.
Good night, folks. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Pastor.
Good night. Susie.
Good night.
Good night, John Boy.
Good night.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
Yeah. Okay.